Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Everybody's Business. I'm Max Chafkin.
And I'm Stacey Vanek Smith.
Hey, Stacey.
Hello, Max. How are you?
I'm good.
I've just been thinking that all the world is a stage. And the economy is no exception. We have got this week the congressional theater around the tax cut extension, the big, beautiful bill.
Yeah, they've got a lot packed into this bill. Tax cuts that are going to potentially save people a lot of money, but also trillions of dollars that could be added to our country's debt.
But why think about that, Max, when you could think about WrestleMania?
Oh, wow.
We have got economic writer Kyla Scanlon on to talk about how much you can learn about Trump's approach to the economy by watching WWE.
And I've read this everywhere. AI is coming for your job.
Be afraid.
We're going to actually try to get into what that means.
And we have a little actual magic in our underrated story of the week.
So, Stacey, this is the week many college graduations happen. We have 4 million college students graduating in the United States. Many of those folks, of course, going to be getting their first jobs really soon. They hope, their parents hope.
Yes, exactly. And this is a strange, possibly difficult time to be coming onto the job market. A lot of people, economists, are calling this a frozen job market, meaning unemployment is near historic lows, but hiring levels are too.
You know, look at the unemployment level for college graduates. It's almost 6%, which is low, but it's not that low.
Yeah, it's always a little higher for recent college graduates, a little bit of a tougher game.
Stacey, this, of course, is the part of the show where we go out into the world, talk to some people, ask them how the world of business, the economy is affecting them. Where did you go this week?
I wanted to talk to these recent college grads, see what was going on, how many of them had jobs, how they were feeling about the job market. We're pretty close to Columbia University. Their graduation was this week. And I went to the campus.
Congratulations to the 2025 class of Columbia Journalism School.
Everyone was running around in graduation robes. They were taking pictures with their parents. They were like holding big bouquets and hugging each other. It was really sweet.
They're all hungover also, by the way.
I did not think about that, but possibly. I went to ask them, like, how do you feel venturing out into the job market and what is going on?
I'm a graduate student in computer science.
Do you have a job?
Oh, yeah, I do. I got lucky, to be honest.
Among your friends, like, how many have jobs? How many are still looking?
In computer science, approximately 60 to 70% have jobs.
I studied epidemiology.
Do you have a job right now?
No, I do not.
How does the job market feel?
Extremely hard. I was mainly aiming for labs in different universities, but universities are cutting funds.
How's your job market for electrical engineering?
Just terrible. The market is super terrible right now. Even worse than China.
Does AI affect your field at all?
AI is a tricky subject because it really does help a lot. And in other ways, it's detrimental to a lot of job security. It's kind of 50-50.
I use AI every day, by the way.
So you're using AI to code?
Yeah, almost every day, actually. A lot of people are doing it these days.
I just want to know how many of these kids are using ChatGPT to write their essays because, that guy's like, I use it to code. I don't know.
Well, he was a software engineer. He has a job, but I was pretty shocked that like 30-40% of software engineering grads did not have jobs that he talked to. And a lot of people were really pessimistic. A lot of people did not want to talk to me about this.
I feel like it's always like this for college graduates, or maybe this is just my adulthood or whatever. But the economy's changing. You're coming in there with a limited network. I mean, even these Columbia students who of course have a huge leg up from a normal person. But yeah, I mean, it's scary, but I'm excited for them.
I'm excited for them too. Of course, we wish them well.
We're going to hopefully later in the show put some data to this question of job loss, really get to specifics, but we definitely want to hear what you all think. How big an impact is technology having on the job market? Like, are you using AI in your job? Do you think AI could replace you? Do you, like me, think it's a total bunch of BS and
gosh,
whatever? Let us know. Stacey, we had so many good emails this week.
Yes, we did. We had great emails this week, and we're going to be talking about them in future shows. But please keep the emails coming. We want to know what you want to hear about.
Yeah, that address, everybody's at Bloomberg.net. That's everybody's with an S at Bloomberg.net. Just real quick, Stacey, I got to tell you, we had a couple requests in terms of future episodes about insurance. Do you believe that? So Alex, a listener,
Insurance is fascinating.
wants to know why insurance is getting so expensive, why car insurance is getting so expensive. Will wants to hear about the kind of voting rights control at Berkshire Hathaway. Marita asked about the bond markets. I know we'll hit that. And a listener named Josh gave us a note that I'd say is bordering on NC-17 rated that I am not going to give, but
business?
We do appreciate it, Joshua.
Yeah, apparently glazing does not mean what we think it means.
The big story this week is this tax bill. The House worked hard to pass a version of the bill, the big, beautiful bill, just before the long weekend. It's an extension, essentially, of the 2017 tax cuts that Trump put in place during his first administration and that were set to expire.
Yeah, the amounts of money that we're talking about are huge. We're talking around $4 trillion over the next 10 years. And to put that in perspective, our entire budget, what it costs to run the entire country, is about $7 trillion a year. So it's just the amounts of money are enormous and even potentially quite destabilizing. Obviously, it's going to add to our debt, which is already pretty substantial.
Yeah, this is confusing, particularly because we were talking in this country just a couple of weeks ago about all the cuts we were making, and now all of a sudden there's a huge deficit.
Yes,
there are some cuts in the bill, cuts to Medicaid, food aid, clean energy. It's a lot of really important stuff that people care about.
The problem, I think, with a lot of these issues is that it gets a little bit dry and boring. I hate to say that because it is really important, but it's a little bit boring tax policy when you're talking about pass-throughs, tax brackets, state and local policy. It's a lot less exciting to talk about than DOGE.
Or than professional wrestling.
Everything's less exciting to talk about than professional wrestling. And according to Kyla Scanlon, author of In This Economy and econ blogger extraordinaire, WrestleMania has taken over the U.S. economy. And the tax cut is the perfect example of what is going on. She joins us now. Hi, Kyla.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for talking with us. So, Kyla, you talk in one of your latest Substacks and videos that you made about this economic policy aligning with something called kayfabe in wrestling. What is kayfabe and how does this apply to taxes?
Yeah, so kayfabe is staged reality. So if you ever watched WrestleMania or anything like that, the wrestlers have these personas that they take on and they act out these really elaborate like wrestle moves, pile drivers, things like that. And they even act like that off the wrestle mat. And it's just this idea that the whole reality is fake, more or less, but it looks incredibly real. The World of Wrestling by Roland Barthes was the big inspiration behind that piece. And he sort of talks about...
Roland Barthes, like the philosopher, linguist.
Yeah, so he wrote this incredible piece that talks all about how, you know, wrestling and this sense of justice and this sense of morality. And like, in order to really have a narrative, like you have to have these good guys and these bad guys and you have to have kayfabe. And so the analogy comparing WrestleMania essentially to the US government, where we have a lot of posturing, big chair slams on people's heads, like a lot of it seems staged in order to make some sort of point, specifically with regards to tariffs. But the tax bill could definitely be kayfabe too. And so I think that the current administration, just because of the background of Trump in WWE, in reality TV, like the guy is an attention merchant, right? He's really good at it. And so I think it's carrying over.
Speaking of that, we got to play this clip for people who haven't heard it.
Oh, my God. So I was looking around. I vaguely remembered. I used to watch wrestling back in the day, and I remembered vaguely that Trump had been on. But of course, with the magic of the internet, I looked it up. And I have to say, I was like a little bit mind blown. We have a clip of Donald Trump. Basically, it's part of this something called the Battle of the Billionaires, but it was a wrestling match where Trump was in it.
Another straight right to the throat, right to the neck. A Stone Cold Steve Austin.
So Trump is like walking around the ring.
Yeah. And he's like on the edge of the ring. And then he jumps in and starts beating up this other man, this other fighter.
Vince McMahon.
Yeah.
He's beating up Vince McMahon, who was the CEO of WWE. Also, by the way, the husband of the current Secretary of Education.
I know. Yeah, I mean, it's wild. I mean, one thing that is coming into my mind, especially around the tax cuts, is all of the theater with Doge and the government cuts. And I read that all of the cuts that have been made by Elon Musk and Doge amount to just a tiny, tiny fraction of 1% of the budget. Meanwhile, the tax bill, which has had some drama around it, but way less than Doge. We've just talked about it, way less. The implications economically are enormous. I mean, that also seems like it kind of falls under this kayfabe philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an element of that. Like, Doge was very public. Like, they had their own Twitter account. They had those guys on the front lines doing interviews all over the place. Elon Musk was in charge of Doge, even though I think he says he isn't. And so they were very, intentionally in the public eye, which is probably why they got more press and media.
I like the analogy for Doge, too, because, Silicon Valley, you guys both probably know this, but Silicon Valley's super into kayfabe as a term.
Really?
I spent a lot of time when I was writing my book listening to Peter Thiel, and Thiel talks about kayfabe all the time. I feel like with Doge, they were in costumes. And the crazy thing to me, though, is it worked, right? There were budget experts saying hey, these guys are never going to get anywhere near $2 trillion. Nonetheless, you had Jamie Dimon and people, I think, who are very smart and very sophisticated, essentially saying, oh, this is great. Basically talking as if we'd entered this era of austerity. Meanwhile, over here in the middle of the night, they're planning this tax cut that's going to add a huge amount of money to the federal budget. It's doing the exact opposite thing that if you were watching the show that was on TV, that was the story you were being told.
I think that distraction is the ultimate tool. And I know I sound like a little bit of a conspiracy theorist when I talk about this stuff, but I think hidden in this tax bill is a bunch of stuff that can really hurt a lot of people, especially in terms of healthcare access and in terms of just affordability too. And so I think for the government, having this sort of dramatic sparring, Trump tweeted or truthed or whatever about, the government selling Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac on, the morning of this beautiful big tax bill getting passed. And so I think there's always some element of distraction that comes up when they want to have stuff slide under the rug a bit.
Kyla, I'm wondering, during the last Trump administration, the Republicans did this thing where they drastically dialed back the deductions for people who live in high tax states. And in certain ways, right, that was a understandable, sort of sensible move if you were going to cut taxes. And now it appears like they're poised to raise it a huge amount. That seems like a big part of the problem here.
Yeah, I mean, the bill gives out a lot of tax cuts and doesn't really think through how to pay for them. A lot of the idea is that, maybe tariffs will cover some of those costs, or the cuts to Medicaid and Medicare will cover some of those costs. I think it's a pretty short-term look at that because, sure, you can cut costs in the meantime, but the repercussions down the road could be massively expensive. They're also increasing taxes on Harvard, and maybe that'll cover it, but it's incredibly expensive and it's incredibly short-sighted because the last thing that we need is more tax cuts.
So Trump has tried to raise taxes on rich people a few times, or sort of floated it, and he just always gets smushed basically by the Republican establishment and big donors and stuff. I almost feel like it's because the kayfabe stuff doesn't work on private equity managers. You can't just kayfabe your way into cutting carried interest, because there are very, very rich people who really, really don't want that to happen.
And they're going to fight back. You can't really hit them with a chair.
They can afford a bigger chair. So to do a little bit of counter-programming, Kyla, where should we be looking? What should we be focused on? With all of these performances happening, where should we look?
I mean, I think the arbiter of truth right now, in my opinion, is the bond market. And so I think that if you want sort of a story about how the world is thinking about the United States, looking at the bond market is pretty useful because it doesn't mess around, right? It's going to usually tell some element of the truth. The bond market is not happy about this big, beautiful bill.
Because of the debt.
Yeah, Moody's downgraded the U.S. I think that's pretty useful, sort of using that as a gauge.
What signals should we be on the lookout for with the bond market?
Yeah, so if people are looking at the situation in the U.S. government and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know, for the 30-year bond, for example, I'm not sure how the U.S. government is going to look in the next 30 years. You're going to have to pay me so much money in order for me to buy these bonds. Yields are going up. That's a good way to gauge how the market is thinking about the long-term viability of the U.S. government and how they're looking at that outlook.
Yeah, it's kind of like if I'm in a lot of debt and go to the bank and they might give me a loan, but they're going to charge me a really high interest rate for it because they're going to look at me as a really risky person to lend money to.
Yeah, and right now the U.S. government is seeming increasingly risky to people, especially investors.
You hinted at this, Kyla, but like a lot of this stuff may not survive the Senate bill. Is your assumption that the Republicans will figure out a way to, get this passed, adding a huge amount to the debt? Or is there some chance that there are lots of different forces pushing against this, one of which is the bond market, that we may, be talking in 2 months or 3 months and this thing hasn't really gone anywhere, or they're still fighting over this or something?
Yeah. What's sort of funny is everybody thinks they're big and in charge until the bond market comes knocking.
It's James Carville, right? I want to come back as the bond market when I die because everybody's afraid of you.
Yes. And I think it's really simple to pass these big things and be like, it's going to pay for itself and we're going to replace income taxes with tariffs, which is just not mathematically possible. But I absolutely think that the bond market will let its thoughts be known. And the U.S. government, the Treasury specifically, is going to have to do things to appease the bond market in the meantime, things that they didn't want to do, that they don't want to do. And it could get complicated really fast if they keep on being irresponsible.
The biggest wrestler of all, the bond market. Kyla Scanlon is the author of In This Economy. You can check her out on Substack, TikTok, Instagram. She makes content every day, talks about all kinds of aspects of the economy. There's definitely a lot to learn, and it's always really fun, really unique takes, much like WrestleMania as an explanation for our economy.
Stacey, we heard at the top of the show that the graduates of today, the young people who will lead us in the future, they're concerned about artificial intelligence. They're worried about what it means for their jobs. And, it has gotten me thinking, how much is this actually happening right now? I mean, and we've seen a lot of this. Businessweek has a great issue out, the AI issue. There's some interesting stuff in there on this. There's also just an amazing overview of what's happening in the market. To kind of break this down, I wanted to bring in Sarah Fryer, who's Bloomberg's big tech editor. She's following all of these big companies and these big investments. And I think also just brings a lot of good perspective here. Hey, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
So, Sarah, there's a new genre in social media that I've been noticing, a kind of a new form of broetry, which is the poetry that executives write on LinkedIn. And that is the memo warning your employees about AI. Toby Lutke of Shopify wrote one essentially saying that everyone had to use AI and you weren't going to be allowed to hire unless you show that AI couldn't do it first. Micah Kaufman of Fiverr wrote, AI is coming for your job. I'm not talking about your job at Fiverr. I'm talking about
wrote that to his employees?
Your ability to stay in your profession. He not only wrote it to his employees, he posted it publicly. Sarah, can you just give us a sense? Is this basically like conventional wisdom among the kind of tech CEO class that basically hey, we just need to buckle up. The AI is going to replace half my staff or something?
I think it's for real that it's changing a lot of the workforce. And I think the sentiment from the Shopify CEO, he got really slammed on the internet for that, for telling employees he wasn't going to give them headcount unless he could prove that AI couldn't do that job. That's pretty widespread right now in tech companies. And I think that it's more of a forcing factor to get their employees to fully embrace the new technology and understand what they can do with it. Now, there are downsides. There are obvious downsides. If you have so much work done by AI, it gets things wrong with that.
Yeah, there was
right?
just that book list this week where a bunch of newspapers published the 15 great summer reads, and it had been generated by AI, and 10 of them weren't real books.
There are so many examples like this, so many cautionary tales. The one that Stacey mentioned, though, very bad.
Then you have companies like Microsoft who do major rounds of layoffs. And we looked at the numbers, and Bloomberg found that the majority of those positions, the hardest hit, were software engineers. So those people graduating from college that you noted who are worried about the workforce, of course they're worried because they grew up in this era of everyone of our generation telling them to learn to code. They all grew up learning that STEM was everything and that you had to be a quantitative person in order to succeed in the modern world. Now, that may have been true 10 years ago, but now there are fewer entry-level software jobs because so much of entry-level software can be done with AI. It's not replacing the senior jobs. And in fact, a lot of the code still has to be checked by someone who actually knows what they're doing. It's going to make it easier for someone who's an experienced developer to develop faster. But for those entry-level jobs, for those people who are going to come in and learn the basics and be put to work before growing up, it's going to be harder for that.
I got to say, the New York Federal Reserve Bank recently published a list of the undergraduate majors with the highest and lowest unemployment rates. And as
they do that every year.
English major, I have never felt so smug in my entire life because for decades I have been hearing this learn to code thing. And let me tell you, art history majors, that's like even more like irrelevant from that point of view than,
objection, but continue.
No, like when somebody from the shape rotator class tries to make fun of us word cells, they always pick on art history majors, and unemployment rate for art history majors, 3%. Unemployment rate.
Right. If you're putting your kid through college now or through high school now, forget about those coding hams. Teach them critical thinking. Like so much about...
Yeah, you got to know the difference between a Doric column and an Ionic column, or you will not get by in this world.
I love STEM. I think that stuff is really, engineering is really important. But you need to be able to look at what the AI produces and correct it. I mean, that's like a key skill. And you need to be able to use the AI in a way that is productive. And we're seeing it's not just Microsoft. Google's CEO said on their earnings call that 30% of the code that's submitted now is maybe more than 30% created by AI. So it's really across the board. And I think that, young people need to just figure out how to learn creativity, critical thinking, independence, originality. I mean, all of these extremely human skills are going to become more in demand because rote memorization, basic math, like all of that stuff is we got it handled by the machines.
It's not just coding either. There was a big study this week from the UN, from their International Labor Organization, kind of looking at the impact AI would have on jobs. And they looked at 30,000 different occupations, and they found that overall in wealthy countries, about 1 in 3 jobs would be impacted. Distressingly, way more jobs that are traditionally considered female jobs would be what they called transformed. That'd be like clerical jobs, assistants, things like that. But it's huge.
Can I just say, as much as like part of me wants to believe this, and I want to believe that like being an art history major is like a great career choice, and
hey, I was comp lit.
And I should say like the computer engineering major, 7.5% unemployment. Computer science.
Wait, 7.5% unemployment.
6.1.
So like double art history
more than
majors.
double, both more than double art history. But you know what? There are other things going on here. And I am somewhat skeptical of this narrative, to be honest. And I'll tell you why. Number one, these companies are all very, very motivated to be pushing this idea. So like Microsoft has invested tens of billions of dollars. Its entire business is essentially predicated on this working. If this didn't work, if you weren't able to replace large numbers of computer scientists, like that is going to be a big problem for Microsoft. The second thing is, all of these tech companies hired huge numbers of engineers and computer scientists, often overpaying during the pandemic and immediately afterward. There was this war for talent. And I don't think we know for sure whether these layoffs are actually layoffs that are related to AI, or are they layoffs that are related because these companies like basically staffed up too much.
Well, they definitely staffed up too much. And that culling started around 2023, that, Mark Zuckerberg's year of efficiency. A bunch of other companies did. They sort of broke the seal in terms of tech layoffs. Previously, it was considered like a really bad sign if your company was laying people off, and these tech jobs were considered like the most stable careers you could have. But what I'm hearing from everyone who's working in tech right now, even big tech, is that you don't get tenure anymore. You have to actually be working. You have to be submitting code. You have to be doing things that have an impact. And I think that that's a reaction to this sort of complacency that developed from just the growing forever idea. And all of the big tech companies across the board, if you look at their products, I mean, their legacy products are getting to the point where they're not going to fuel the next 10 years the way they fueled the last 20, right? Google search, Facebook's Instagram and WhatsApp, Amazon's marketplace, Microsoft's products. How much bigger can those things get, right? And so there has to be a lighting of a fire under all of these companies to push them to the next era, whatever that may be. And look at Apple, like what's coming after the iPhone? They have no idea. They don't have a solution yet. So these tech workers who used to kind of have a famously cushy lifestyle are being put to work in a way that they are not used to.
I mean, I find it really interesting what Max was saying about these CEOs kind of scaring everybody, or sort of using the robots are coming, be very afraid, to maybe scare workers. Like, who should be scared? What jobs do you see AI really threatening versus maybe not as much as we thought?
I mean, kind of think about the secretarial jobs when nobody really knew how to type except for secretaries, right? Soon, everyone's going to know how to use AI in ways that are, integrated with their jobs. And, there's no career that's not going to be using that a little bit. It's just going to become so infused with our everyday the way the internet is. So whether people will become totally unemployed, I mean, long-haul truck drivers, that's going away. Customer service, I think, is going away.
Is it though? I don't think that's clear. That's going away at all.
Trucks,
trucking is going to be one of the hardest ones.
I know you're a self-driving skeptic.
Show me a computer driving a truck, and I'll believe you,
Max. I live in the city of Waymo, and I see Waymo become ubiquitous here in San Francisco.
The thing about trucking that is hard is that they drive really fast, and like if it crashes, it kills people. I really think it's important to have humility here. Like,
Max, here's what I know is going to happen. People are going to overdo it before they correct, right? Say you're outsourcing editing of research papers or something, and you decide, oh, we don't need any copy editors anymore. We'll just use AI. And then you realize that the AI messed things up. That'll happen afterwards, right? There's going to be like a mass embrace before there's a backlash and people figure out the balance, like a pendulum swinging, right? And finally get to a point where we understand what works and what doesn't work. And what's happening right now is we're getting to this point in the industry where we're kind of realizing this pace that we've had for the past couple of years of like, okay, the better model comes out, and the better model comes out, and the more specific model comes out. I think if we just like stop and take stock of what has already been built and then figure out how to apply it, that's kind of the next step, right? And you're seeing companies invest in that. OpenAI hiring people like Fiji Simo. That's because they need to just take what they've already done and put it to work, figure out what is useful about it.
And Sarah, you're saying that people are going to overdo it at some point, which I think is like 100% a great prediction. It's even happening now. This thing that Stacey brought up at the top of the show, where a bunch of major newspapers printed a whole page of book recommendations, books by famous authors. The thing was, 10 of the 15 books were just entirely made up. And this went in I know that, newspapers are maybe not as big as they used to be, but it went in the printed newspaper. That like some, old lady in like Philadelphia is hearing about an Isabel Allende book that does not exist.
Tidewater Dreams.
And wondering why she can't find Tidewater Dreams.
Yeah, I mean, AI is built upon an approximation of everything that has happened in the past, right? So it's a remixer of knowledge from so many different sources. And sometimes that's going to come out looking funky. And that's what I'm talking about, critical thinking. Like, you have to check this work. You can't, it looks so perfect that, you just trust it.
This is why you need your long haul trucker, because somebody's got to check that work.
Yeah, someone's got to check that work.
And your art history majors.
Try making up an idiom and asking Google what it means. It'll just make up an answer. If you ask it, like, for recipes using gasoline, it'll tell you about how to use gasoline to make spaghetti. It's just like early days in the world of AI and its application, which is why, like, you can see how transformational it's going to be, but you also have to understand that you're dealing with something that still needs to be trained and can't fully replace a human.
So, Max, we are now to the part of the show where we talk about our underrated story of the week. This is a story we think did not get enough attention.
Yeah, and you've got one for us today.
Not only is this an underrated story of the week, I think this is the underrated story of, like, the century. So get this. Scientists at Europe's Large Hadron Collider, they successfully transformed lead into gold.
Stacey, are you saying that the 1,000-year-old dream
Yes.
of alcohol, I don't think it's the story of the century, could be the story of the millennium. We're probably talking about a large quantity of lead turning into a large quantity of gold. This is something you could see.
Okay, that's semantics. I think what we need to look at is that this is a quest that humankind has been on since like 3000 BC. Egyptians were looking into this. Building blocks of matter, transforming matter. It's been linked to eternal life. It's been linked to balancing the universe. I mean, Isaac Newton was into this.
This is like
Secret
on the level
societies
of Fountain of Youth, basically.
100%. Thousands of years.
And some dorks in Switzerland did this, you're saying?
They figured it out. They turned lead into gold.
How?
89,000 atoms. It's apparently microscopic. It only was gold for like a couple of milliseconds.
So wait, what did they do? They just like shot it through the collider or whatever, shot it through the tube, and and like somewhere along the way it transformed?
That's actually pretty close from what I understand, which is, granted, not a lot. So they had this big particle accelerator that smashes atoms together at really high speeds, and they found a way to kind of knock these particles together out of lead atoms and like briefly turn them into gold.
Now, this is obviously very cool, but like, do you have any sense of like what we're going to do with this? Like turning a little piece of lead into a little piece of gold and then having it turn back?
In other words, like, kind of, why do we care?
Yeah, well, just there must be some sort of use, right? They must have been doing this for a reason besides just the...
Here's why I think this is the business story that I think it is. The gold market, Max. The gold market. Gold has been hitting record highs because in this topsy-turvy world of inflation, of crypto, nobody even knows what money is, people still trust gold. Gold is probably one of the oldest stores of value in the world. For centuries, people have been putting value into gold.
Are you telling me I need to short the gold market right now? This is not investment advice, by the way.
I mean, short the gold market. No, this is the last anchor that we have to anything real involving money. Like, what happens to us when that goes away? When just a bunch of people in Switzerland with a particle accelerator can just crank out gold. 89,000 atoms at a time.
I didn't hear an answer to the question there, but I do hope that's the physicists.
Currency markets disrupted forever.
The physicists who listen to this show will write us at everybody's at
and they're going to
Bloomberg.net
say that
and tell us
no idea what I'm talking about.
What we're going to do with the 29 picogram piece of material that is briefly gold. But that's really cool. This show is produced by Stacey Wong. Magnus Henriksen is our supervising producer. Blake Maples handles engineering. Amy Keene is our editor. And Brendan Francis Noonan is our executive producer. Sage Bauman heads Bloomberg Podcasts. Special thanks to Jeff Muskas, Anna Mazarakis, Robert Smith, and Aaron Casper. If you have a minute, please rate and review this show. It means a lot to us. And if you have a story or an idea or something that should be our business, email us at everybodies@bloomberg.net. That's everybody with an S at bloomberg.net. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.